In Austria, President Alexander Bellen says he will hold talks with the leader of the far-right Freedom Party on Monday to seek a way out of the country's political stalemate. The president made the announcement after meeting Chancellor Karl Nehammer, who is resigning following the breakdown of coalition talks between his Conservatives and the Social Democrats. Together, the two parties had sought to prevent the far-right Freedom Party, which won the most votes in Austria's September's election, from forming a government. The breakdown of the talks could pave the way for far-right FPÖ leader Herbert Kickl to come to power, with the Conservatives serving as junior partners, despite previous unwillingness to work with the far-right.
Fellow Austrians, I have used the past hours to hold talks with people in positions of political responsibility. In the course of these talks, it became clear that the voices within the Conservatives, which had ruled out any cooperation with the Freedom Party under Herbert Kickl, were no longer as loud as they used to be. That means there may be a new way forward which hadn't existed before. Therefore, I have called the party leader of the Freedom Party, Herbert Kickl, and invited him to talks tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock here in the Hofburg to discuss the new situation.
And for more on the political deadlock there in Austria, we can talk to journalist Steve Chait in Vienna. Steve, we've just heard there the president. What exactly does this mean?
This means that Herbert Kickl is now almost certain to become Austria's next chancellor. President der Bellen, who has a strong personal dislike for Herbert Kickl, has sort of had to hold his nose and say it's now inevitable. The only way forward is to invite him for talks and to proceed with negotiations between the Austrian People's Party and the Freedom Party.
Now, tell us more about the Freedom Party and its leader, Herbert Kickl.
Starting with Herbert Kickl, his history goes all the way back to when Jörg Haider, a pioneer of populism in Europe and the world, was the head of the FPÖ. And Herbert Kickl was his speechwriter, his message maker, and his protege. And he learned a lot from Jörg Haider and has built his reputation up slowly to now become the Freedom Party leader. And he is going to certainly, as it looks now, fulfill his political dreams. But what's very important to remember about Herbert Kickl is that he is good at rubbing people the wrong way. He enjoys rubbing people the wrong way. He's very combative, but that goes down well with voters in Austria. And as a populist, he knows how to hit the target.
As you just mentioned, his character is popular with Austrian voters. But looking at the party, the far-right FPÖ, what's their appeal to voters?
Their appeal as a populist party, and as we know, globally, populism is in vogue at the moment. They say what people are thinking and have often been afraid to articulate. They say it out loud. It's feared that they sort of appeal to people's worst instincts. They really gained a lot of traction, became extremely popular during the pandemic when Austria and much of the rest of the world were in lockdown. They were able to air the grievances that the wider electorate had. They really made a strong comeback there. And have moved forward on this populist platform that people will recognize in many countries around the world. They say what people want to hear. That goes down well. It got them a lot of votes. And now they're going to have to be in a position to deliver on those promises. And as we know, as we've seen in other places, it's one thing to promise. It's a totally different thing to deliver.
Talking about delivering, a coalition between the Conservatives and the far right, could we see similar issues develop there like we've seen today, that negotiations collapse over certain issues?
They could certainly collapse, but the wide expectation is that the coalition negotiations will lead to a government being formed. The ÖVP is desperate to avoid fresh elections, so it's expected that they will come to an agreement, and that Chancellor Kickl, or that Herbert Kickl will become the next chancellor, and that they will build a viable coalition. But let's not forget, a People's Party and Freedom Party government did collapse in 2019, so it could happen again.
Steve Chait there reporting from Vienna. Thank you very much, Steve.
For some analysis now, let's talk to Natascha Strobl. She is a political scientist and an expert on right-wing extremism. Welcome to DW News. So what do you make of the fact that voices within the Austrian Conservative Party aren't as loud as they used to be, as the president put it, with regards to blocking a coalition with the Freedom Party?
Well, it's not surprising because it's the same game they always played in the last elections, where they were very stout on no coalition with the Freedom Party. But when push comes to shove, they always formed a coalition with the Freedom Party. So it's not surprising, still very disappointing, because their whole election campaign was, we want to prevent Herbert Kickl from becoming the Chancellor of Austria.
All right, so the Freedom Party topped the poll during the last parliamentary elections. So what makes them so appealing to voters in Austria?
Well, they have the same playbook, basically, as every other right-wing party in Europe or the US has. They use the frustration, the very real frustration of people, and try to put it into racism, into culture wars, into anti-corona prevention, and so on. So the whole frustration people feel gets a home with the Freedom Party. And that's, of course, also because the other parties are too preoccupied with themselves to see how frustrated people really are.
All right. Well, you've mentioned it there that it's not just the case in Austria. Of course, many countries across Europe, Hungary, one of Austria's neighbours, of course, Italy, Germany, and several others are seeing this rise in support for right-wing political parties. You've touched on it there, but why are they so successful, and how are they actually accessing the people, and what is it that really seems to resonate with so many people?
Well, I always say the strength of the far right is the weakness of all the other democratic parties. So you have to see how they interact with each other. And we live in crisis after crisis after crisis. And the right-wing parties offer an alternative. Of course, it's an authoritarian alternative. It's an alternative where people are excluded, but it is an alternative. And that's what there should be more of: democratics, solidaric, and so on, alternatives to the status quo, because people are really fed up with the status quo. And that's what democratic parties don't seem to realize. And so the far right is on the rise.
And it's particularly on the rise as well in certain demographics, right? Because we've seen younger voters, more and more of that younger demographic are voting for the far right. Why is that?
Well, younger voters used to be far more progressive, and they still are. But it's the female younger voters who are more progressive than their male counterparts. So we see this whole gender gap, especially with young people. And there's a whole lot of issues in there. A loss of identity, what does it mean to be a young male nowadays, and so on. But very important is the economic issues. So will I be able to have a family, to have the house, to have the car, and the vacations, all the things that mattered to every generation before? And it seems less and less likely that people will actually achieve this sort of life. And this leads to frustration. And we see it, especially in young people, that it's not even, they cannot even think that it is possible for them to achieve some sort of basic wealth within society.
Very interesting speaking to you, Natascha. Political scientist Natascha Strobl, thank you for joining us on DW News today.
Thank you so much.